Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're diving into Shakespeare today, specifically Coriolanus.
Yes.
And not just any Coriolanus, we've got a special one, an 1881 edition.
That's right.
With introductions and notes by a guy named Henry and Hudson.
Right.
So that's going to be our lens as we go through this thing. We're going to be looking at the historical context, some deep character analysis, and kind of the political and social themes that are going on in the play, as understood in the late 19th century.
That's right. This edition was actually intended for students and families.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it offers, I think, a really interesting way to look at Shakespeare. Not only to just kind of encounter the text, as we do now, but also to see how it was being interpreted and taught more than a century ago.
Right.
So we're going to be looking at Hudson's perspective on the historical background, the nuances of the language, and all those kind of messy motivations that drive Shakespeare's character.
So this is kind of a shortcut for the listener to a deeper, more insightful understanding of Coriolanus.
It is. You'll get all the good bits without having to wade through all the academic jargon.
Okay, I like that. So let's start at the source, right? The actual text itself. The play Coriolanus wasn't printed until the first folio of 1623.
Right.
Which was, as most of our listeners know, was the first collected edition of Shakespeare's plays.
That's right.
So when it finally appeared, it wasn't exactly pristine, was it?
Well, no, it's actually considered one of the worst printed texts in the whole collection.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Hudson calls them palpable corruptions. That's his phrase.
Oh, okay.
So you can imagine the challenge for scholars over the centuries trying to, reconstruct what Shakespeare actually wrote.
Yeah, it's like a literary detective game almost, where you're going back and trying to fix those errors.
Yeah, and they've had some success, Oh, good.
Through careful critical work and a lot of guesswork.
Yeah.
But even by the time Hudson was working on the play, there were still passages that he said presented just huge difficulties and resist all attempts to correct them.
So these are still kind of ongoing mysteries within the text.
Absolutely. It just shows the dedication of scholars to preserve and understand Shakespeare.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So speaking of understanding Shakespeare, let's talk about when he wrote this play.
Okay.
Was Coriolanus an early work? Was it later in his career? What do we know?
This is one of the more difficult ones to date.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because unlike some of his other plays, Coriolanus doesn't have any clear references to it during Shakespeare's lifetime.
Nope.
There's no contemporary mentions or allusions. The only real clue we have externally is from an elegy written for the actor Richard Burbage, who, was famous for playing Coriolanus.
Right.
So we know at least that he must have performed in it.
Yeah.
Okay, so unlike something like Othello, where there are all these contemporary references to, like, the new baronetage or whatever.
Exactly. No, this play doesn't seem tied to any specific events that we know of.
Okay.
So that means scholars have had to rely on what's called internal evidence, looking at Shakespeare's style, his use of language, the themes, that kind of thing, to try and place it in his career.
And what have they come up with based on that analysis?
Well, the general consensus, and Hudson agrees with this, is that Coriolanus is one of Shakespeare's very last plays.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the language is really interesting in these late plays.
How so?
Well, the metaphors are really bold. There's this kind of forceful and even, imperious style to his writing. A lot is said in very few words. In fact, Hudson says that few, if any, of the tragedies surpass Coriolanus in that respect.
Wow, okay. So late work from Shakespeare. Now, where did he get the story from?
Okay, well, like many playwrights of his time, Shakespeare often used historical sources. And for Coriolanus, he went to Plutarch. Specifically, Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Greeks and Romans in the English translation by Sir Thomas North.
Okay, so he wasn't just kind of like lightly inspired by Plutarch. He was really using him as a source.
Oh, yeah. Hudson points out that Shakespeare's borrowings go far beyond just the basic plot and the characters.
Yeah.
He actually uses specific words and phrases, even whole sentences, directly from North's translation.
Wow, that's interesting. Do we have a specific example of that?
Sure. One of the best examples is when Coriolanus, after he's been banished from Rome, he goes to Antium and seeks out Aufidius, his enemy.
Right.
And Hudson actually includes an abridged version of North's text
describing
that encounter. If you compare it to what Shakespeare wrote, the similarities are striking.
Okay.
You see Coriolanus arriving in disguise. He's not recognized at first. Then he reveals himself. There's this big dramatic speech to Ophidius where he talks about all the injuries he inflicted on the Volscians.
Yeah.
And Shakespeare even keeps some of the specific wording.
That's wild. It seems like he was honoring the source material, but then also transforming it into something new and dramatic.
Yeah.
So how does Shakespeare treat this subject then?
Well, Hudson argues that Plutarch's Coriolanus was already a good fit for a tragic hero.
Okay.
He embodied those old Roman ideals of manhood and virtue.
Yeah.
But Shakespeare, he takes it a step further, and he really explores some deep problems of social and civic life.
I see.
And Hudson says that these problems arise organically from Coriolanus' character.
So it's not just like a straightforward historical account. He's actually using the story to explore something more.
Exactly. Hudson talks about Shakespeare's grand philosophic impartiality.
What does that mean?
Well, he's saying that Shakespeare is carefully weighing the different forces, Coriolanus himself, the patricians, the plebeians, and he's showing the consequences of their actions and their motivations. It's like he's asking questions about human nature and society.
Interesting. So the way he selected and arranged those historical events, that wasn't random.
No. Hudson says it was done with incredible skill to highlight both the poetic aspects and the political dimensions of the story. In fact, he quotes another critic, a German critic named Schlegel, who said that while Shakespeare seems to be sticking close to history, he's actually doing this really profound survey of humanity.
Interesting.
And he's showing a deep understanding of the social dynamics between men and women, different classes, different ranks in society.
It's more than just a historical account, it's a commentary on society.
Exactly. And Hudson is very clear that Coriolanus is not a didactic play.
What does that mean?
It's not, preaching a simple moral. It's not trying to teach you a specific lesson. Okay. He calls it an elevation of history into pure drama.
I like that.
A free union of the moral and political idea with the dramatic.
Okay, so it's got these deeper layers, these deeper meanings that you have to kind of uncover.
Yeah.
So one of the things that people often debate about Coriolanus is Shakespeare's depiction of the common people.
Okay.
There's this critic, Hazlitt, who famously accused Shakespeare of having a bias against the people in this play.
Yeah.
So what does Hudson say about that?
Well, he tackles that head on.
Okay.
He admits, that the people's faults are shown.
Yeah.
Shakespeare doesn't shy away from that, but he says their good qualities are also shown. And in his view, it actually leads to more sympathy than contempt. They're shown as being very patient, forgiving.
Yeah.
They acknowledge the greatness of the patricians, and they're really only stirred up by these outside agitators. So they're not just, an irrational mob.
They're more complex than that.
Right. And Hudson even suggests that if there's one character in the play that Shakespeare favors, it's Menenius.
Oh, interesting. Menenius, the old senator?
Yeah.
Why him?
Well, Hudson describes him as this frank, patriotic, liberal soul.
Okay.
He's got a sense of humor. He's got affection for the people, even though he criticizes them.
Okay.
He uses wit and rhetoric to try to calm them down.
Right.
He's like a mediator.
I see. So he's kind of like the voice of reason in the middle of all this.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
So Hudson is saying that Shakespeare presents the people as good.
Yeah, he says they have a preponderance of the amiable and good.
Okay.
And he argues that Coriolanus' big problem is that he doesn't recognize their legitimate claims.
Okay.
He treats them like they exist only for his benefit. He doesn't see their shared humanity, their right to pursue their own welfare.
So it's not Shakespeare hating on the people.
No.
It's Shakespeare showing a flaw in Coriolanus.
Right, that's a key distinction.
Okay.
And Hudson says that the play doesn't try to make Coriolanus lovable. He's this complex figure who is impressive but ultimately kind of distant.
Okay.
And even the scene where the people plunder at Corioli, which is based on history, Hudson defends that.
Okay.
He says it's true to life.
Okay.
And he has some pretty harsh words for people who criticize that.
What does he say?
Well, he basically says that those who despise the play's depiction probably despised the common people in reality.
Ouch. He doesn't hold back.
No, he does not.
He's like, you're just showing your own bias here.
Yeah, and he concludes by saying that Shakespeare's commoners are actually both better and wiser than Coriolanus himself.
All right, so let's talk about Coriolanus, this complicated figure.
Right.
Hudson says that pride is the backbone of his character.
Yes, it's the central element.
So what kind of pride are we talking about here?
Well, it's not just simple arrogance, it's something deeper.
Okay.
It's rooted in his class, his family, but also his own personality. Hudson goes back to Plutarch's description of Coriolanus, and Plutarch said he had great vigor, constancy, which led to some noble achievements, but he also had this vehemence of passion, and this obstinacy made it hard for him to interact with others.
So he's got these great qualities, but then these other qualities that make him...
Yeah, make him difficult.
Right.
And Plutarch admired his resistance to pleasure, hardship, gain, but he was also disgusted by his severity, his ruggedness, his overbearing temper.
So even Plutarch saw this kind of dual nature in Coriolanus.
Yeah, and Hudson points out how even the slightest reproach could just set Coriolanus off. He had this hair-trigger temper, and that's something the Trigians really exploit. They know how to push his buttons. And Hudson also says that even his military actions, sometimes they're driven by egotism rather than a genuine desire to serve.
I see.
He wants their respect, but he doesn't really want their love. And it's paradoxical because they do give him honors, even though he's so insolent. And Hudson quotes a minor character who observes that Coriolanus actually seeks their hate more than their love.
So he wants to prove that he's above them. By making them hate him.
Yeah, and when he asks for their votes, he does it with this mockery. He wants them to see his disdain. And he almost triumphs if they excuse his insincerity.
Like he's playing a game with them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he hates dissembling, but he's actually really good at it when it suits his pride.
Interesting.
It's not calculated, it's more instinctive.
So his pride is this driving force that can manifest in all these different ways.
And Hudson says it's not all bad. You know, it's antisocial, but it also has elements of nobleness, magnanimity. It's tied to his sense of rank, family, country, talents, courage. And it coexists with some positive traits.
Like what?
Well, he has this strange kind of modesty, gratitude, openness, and his desire for renown. It's linked to his integrity as a soldier.
So it's this complicated mix of good and bad.
Yeah, it's not simple.
And you mentioned modesty. You put that in quotes. So what's going on there?
Well, it's equivocal. He doesn't like flattery. He doesn't use it. But he's genuinely offended by praise. And Hudson says that his disgust can actually be seen as disguised egotism.
So it's like he's too good for their praise.
Exactly.
He's above it.
Yeah, he scorns his praisers. He thinks he's superior.
So it's not true humility.
No, it's more like a perverse form of pride.
And this arrogance, this self-importance. It gets to the point where he thinks Rome can't exist without him.
That's right. Yeah, and when he's banished, he sees it as Rome's loss, more than his loss. He even says, I banish you to the people.
Powerful stuff. Now, let's talk about his relationships. Starting with his mother, Volumnia. This is a very strong but complicated bond.
It is. Hudson talks about Coriolanus' glorious pride in his mother. And we see this when he returns from battle. He sees his family, and there's this huge emotional moment. He's trying to hold back his affection. He says, "But out affection, all bond and privilege of nature break. Let it be virtuous to be obstinate."
He's trying to be this stoic Roman, but his feelings are bubbling up. And Volumnia has this incredible influence over him.
She does.
Hudson points to the scene where she convinces him to appease the people. Which is something he really doesn't want to do.
He's completely against it.
Yeah.
But she overpowers him with her will.
And she says to him, "Thy valiantness was mine, thou suck'st it from me, but own'st thy pride thyself."
Right, she's saying you got your strength from me, but your pride, that's all you have.
Okay, so she's both acknowledging his greatness, but also criticizing his pride.
Yeah.
And what about his wife, Virgilia?
Well, her influence is quieter,
Okay.
more understated, but it's still profound.
Okay.
Hudson says that her silence, her grief,
Right.
are sometimes more effective than Volumnia's eloquence.
Right.
And when she makes this silent plea to him, he says, "Best of my flesh, forgive my tyranny." Yeah, it's a really tender moment.
It is. It's this moment of genuine love and affection in the midst of all this political chaos.
Yeah, and Hudson points out that when Coriolanus is set on revenge against Rome, it's his whole family that stands against him. His mother, his wife, his child.
Right.
And Virgilia's silent grief is actually more powerful than Volumnia's arguments.
It is.
So these women have a huge impact on him.
They do.
And it brings us to this idea of Roman womanhood, especially as embodied by Volumnia.
Right.
Hudson sees her as representing a lot of key Roman values.
She does. Hudson says that a nation's legends reflect its values.
Okay.
And Roman legends emphasize martial courage, filial piety, and submission to the state.
Okay.
So reverence for parents, the household gods, these were central to Roman morals.
I see.
And mothers were expected to instill patriotism in their sons.
Right.
They valued their Roman identity above personal glory. So Volumnia's ambition for Coriolanus, it's not just about him being great.
No.
It's about him being a great Roman.
Exactly. Right. She wants him to be the best among the Romans. Right. And that's why she's so upset when he vanished. It's like a personal attack on her. On her Roman spirit. And even when she seems mad, Hudson says it's rooted in this Roman ideal.
Right.
And ultimately her loyalty is to Rome, not to her son.
Right.
She's willing to disown him, to die with Rome, rather than see him destroy it.
So her pride is tempered by patriotism.
Exactly.
Which is something Coriolanus struggles with.
Yeah, he does.
And when she confronts him, she appeals to his sense of duty to Rome.
Okay.
She tells him to humble himself.
Right.
To think of the greater good.
Okay.
And Hudson quotes her speech where she talks about parental reverence as this binding principle that holds society together.
It prevents chaos and disorder.
So let's look at some specific scenes now.
Okay.
Through Hudson's lens, starting with Act I, Scene I.
Okay, the opening scene.
Yeah, plebeians are revolting.
Right.
What does this tell us about Roman society?
Well, we're immediately thrown into this context of famine, and the plebeians are angry. They're angry at the patricians, especially at Marcius.
Okay.
And they have specific grievances.
Like what?
Well, they're starving, while the patricians have full storehouses.
Right.
They feel oppressed by the usury laws, which favor the rich.
Yeah.
And they're upset that laws protecting the poor keep getting repealed.
So they feel like the system is rigged against them.
Yeah, and they're especially mad at Marcius.
Why him?
Because they don't think his actions are motivated by patriotism. They think it's all pride and a desire to please his mother.
So they don't trust him.
Right.
They don't think he cares about them.
Yeah.
And then Menenius comes in with his famous belly fable.
Yeah, he's trying to calm everyone down.
Right.
Hudson sees this as a way of explaining the interdependence of different parts of society.
Right.
The belly represents the Senate.
Okay.
And Menenius is saying that even though it seems like the belly is idle, it's actually essential.
Okay.
Because it nourishes the whole body.
Right.
So he's trying to say that the patricians are important too, right?
But it doesn't work, does it?
No. The plebeians reject it.
Yeah.
They see it as a justification for the patricians' inaction and their indifference to the suffering.
So the fable fails to bridge that divide. It does. Let's move on to Act 1, Scene 4.
Okay.
We get to see Marcius from the perspective of others. Cominius and Aufidius.
Right.
What do they tell us about him?
Well, Cominius praises Marcius for his incredible valor in battle.
Yeah.
He specifically mentions this incident with Tarquin.
Okay.
But Marcius hates being praised. He's not interested in rewards. He's all about action. He doesn't care about recognition. Right.
And Aufidius, he has a very different reaction.
Yeah, his feelings are much more complicated.
Okay.
He envies Marcius's fame. He hates him.
Right.
But he also admires him.
Interesting.
And he vows to defeat him one day.
Okay.
Even if he has to use, underhanded tactics.
Right.
He calls it poaching.
Yeah, so this sets up their future conflict.
Yeah, it foreshadows what's to come.
So in Act 2, the tribunes, Brutus and Sicinius, they really start to become antagonists to Coriolanus.
Right.
What's Hudson's take on them?
Well, he sees them as very manipulative.
Oh.
They're political operators. They exploit Coriolanus' pride and the fickleness of the people to advance their own power. They have a very cynical view of the people. Yeah.
And Menenius is really frustrated with them.
He is.
He sees their actions as petty.
Right, and self-serving. He thinks they're blind to Coriolanus' true worth.
So then we have the election scene.
Yes, Act 2.
Coriolanus is seeking the consulship.
Right.
But he hates the whole process.
Yeah, he's very reluctant.
Right.
He can't bring himself to be humble, to respect the people's opinions.
Right.
And Hudson points out his contempt, his impatience throughout the whole thing.
And of course, the tribunes use this against him.
Oh,
They
yeah.
manipulate the people to revoke their consent. They accuse him of pride, contempt for the people,
Right.
and they say he refuses to show his wounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he's not humble enough
Right.
to display his service.
And this leads to the banishment scene.
Right, in Act 3.
The conflict escalates.
Mm-hmm.
Coriolanus has this outburst,
Yeah,
and he banishes the people.
right.
And Volumnia is furious.
Yeah.
She's enraged.
But ultimately,
Yeah.
he's banished.
He is.
So what does he do?
Well, he goes to his enemy,
Okay.
Ophidius, in Antium.
Right.
He's disguised, but he's still full of pride.
Right.
He reveals himself to Ophidius
Okay.
and offers to serve him against Rome.
Wow, that's a big move.
It is.
He's betraying his own city.
Yeah.
And Hudson quotes his speech where he boasts about all the harm he's done to the Volscians.
Right, like a resume.
Yeah, exactly.
And how does Ophidius react?
Well, he accepts him.
Okay.
He's motivated by admiration, but also by a desire to use Coriolanus against Rome.
So it's a strategic alliance.
Yeah, very much so.
So now we're in Act V, expert speaker.